All right, so we'd like to get things kicked off for our luncheon presentation. If you guys want to grab your lunches and come back in, that's great. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Anna Kapascu, the CEO from Strategic Pharma, and she's going to be talking today on a new age of R&D procurement, strengthening vendor performance management, and oversight with technology. Okay. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I see many familiar faces. My name is Anca Copescu. I'm the CEO and founder of Strategic Pharma. I've been in the industry for more than 15 years, both sides of the aisle, doing corporate development for CROs, building outsourcing departments within pharma, and as of the last 5 years, an entrepreneur building technology for clinical business operations. I oftentimes get asked the question of why did I become an entrepreneur and why I left the industry. And my answer has been pretty consistent, and that is out of love and frustration. And the love comes from my passion for modernizing outsourcing, and it's what I consider to be one of the last untouched verticals within pharma that needs tools, technology, and better processes. And the frustration is the lack of such tools and technology in the market. So today we are going to talk about vendor oversight and how that can be improved through the use of technology. Before I get started, since our solution covers all the key stakeholders in clinical research, I'd like to poll the audience a little bit. So if you're a sponsor, raise your hand. Okay, quite a few sponsors. How about CROs or clinical service providers? Okay, half-half. How about sites? Sites. Okay, that's fine. So about half-half sponsors and CROs. So this is a relevant topic to all of you. And I'm going to start by what we are trying to solve. And we are trying to solve what we call a 50 billion outsourcing management problem. And why we think it's a problem and why 50 billion, it's because this is the average clinical outsource spend, annual clinical outsource spend by pharma that goes to pretty much every exhibitor right there on the hall. And it's a problem because of the way it's being managed at the outsource business infrastructure level. So a couple of things about the market. You said $50 billion are being outsourced. On average, 15% of the spend of a clinical trial goes towards supporting various aspects of clinical business operations. And that include the classic outsourcing process, the vendor management process, the contract management process, different elements that come into place from outsourcing, quality, vendor management, and finance. And of course, it's not only the outsourcing process in itself, but there is a high regulatory pressure to demonstrate vendor oversight. And found last year, for example, it's a record high year in terms of findings related to lack of oversight of clinical service providers. And of course, this is quite complicated, many reasons why that happened. But we also know that the industry tends to pay a bit more attention when there is a risk-related issue that needs to be resolved versus an efficiency-related issue. And I think pharma is proven being a slow adopter on the efficiency side. So what is the problem really? When you think about the huge volume of outsourcing that's happening, many of you being procurement managers or proposals managers at pharma companies, you are very well familiar with the drill, with RFPs in Excel, overly complicated, many tabs, many tasks. Most of the process in terms of the bidding, whether it's competitive, tactical to a strategic partner, goes by email. I've been head of outsourcing at an emerging biotech. I would get the emails back, and each email would have, on average, 10 attachments, to say the very least, that need to be opened, reviewed, and analyzed. There is also, we talked about in the previous panel, resource shortage. And outsourcing departments, are they getting bigger? They aren't. They are getting smaller and smaller. Almost every pharma company that we speak to has less people in outsourcing, more work than ever, high reliance on consultancy, and very few resources. There is also a desire to make things more efficient. When you have fewer people and you have more work, the only way that you can achieve your goals is by putting some efficiency tools in place, by giving your stakeholders more transparency, better ways to look at data, better ways to identify risks. And there is a preference in the industry to use vertical type solutions. Have as few solutions as possible per vertical, not go in one system to do vendor management, in another system to do outsourcing management, another system to do something else, but reducing the number of solutions that also comes to reduction in training and effort and the fluidity of data, equally important. So what's the opportunity? When I was heading outsourcing for a growing biotech, I spent 4 years looking for solutions, and I implemented everything that I could buy, and I was lucky that I had a decent budget for buying. But I got really frustrated by that lack of continuity and fluidity in the solutions that were available to buy. For example, you all know the classic procurement solutions don't work for clinical outsourcing. They simply don't. We know that some of the most infamous ones are not much more than glorified document exchange platforms. And the opportunity that I saw, that my team saw, is in really taking these core pain problems in clinical outsourcing and turning them into easy to adapt, easy to use solutions. So not only the technology, but the overall solution that ultimately our goal and vision is to modernize outsourcing. So we all know about the classic stages of clinical development. We have expanded our platform to cover all of the major stages, and there are activities happening in parallel on the clinical operations side and on the business infrastructure side. So I'm not sure if I know how to use a pointer. Okay, so here you go. So if you go into the setup phase, of course, there's a lot of technology right here in the protocol design and regulatory activities and getting the study started. But outsourcing and proposal managers on the CROs are very busy as well, because regardless of the model that they employ, whether it's tactical or strategic, there is still due diligence to be done. There are on average 7 RFPs per clinical study, whether it goes to a CRO, a central lab, an ECOA platform, and any other company, the average is 7, also an average of 4 change orders per study, so 28 events on a study level. There is, of course, a very active element of management when you go into the execution that has to do primarily with the management of changes that happen at the protocol level and, of course, trickle down into contracts. And of course, there is the inherent need to do a retrospective analysis, and I'm amazed by how little retrospective analysis actually is being done, which is what have we planned, what have we started when we signed the contract, and where did we end? And not only from a total budget perspective, but from the perspective of performance. Very, very important. So what we attempt to do at Clinical Maestro is to bring efficiencies into this infrastructure side of clinical trials across all study phases, across all therapeutic areas, and across all the major stakeholders. So the next slide is a little bit about our journey as a company. We had our first production environment actually exactly 3 years ago, actually end of January 2019. And we started with our first application was Portfolio right here. A portfolio was designed from the beginning to be the most advanced and sophisticated tool for clinical study planning, but it's called portfolio for a reason, because it's meant to be applied at the program and further at the portfolio level. We saw great opportunity in the market by having an incumbent which had old technology and lacking data. And we were really very hungry to bring more efficiency and intelligence to the clinical planning and budgeting process. But of course, to have good benchmark data, you have to source it. And you can't source it by, data entry of PDF contracts. So the only way you can truly source data is by having an engine to acquire it. And having an engine to acquire it means to modernize the sourcing. And again, big opportunity, because we know generic sourcing solutions don't work. We know that clinical trials are extremely complicated. We are looking at an average sponsored bid grid having 300 plus lines, an average CRO bid grid having 1,500 plus lines. So there is so much complexity that goes into sourcing. So we wanted to take a stab of creating a standard for sourcing, collecting data in a standardized fashion, and then feeding the data back into the planning engine. So sourcing solution was released about 6 months after. In 2019, we've run over $5 billion worth of bids in short 3 years. That's impressive. We're very proud of this number. More than 40 CROs, and not only CROs, clinical service providers bidding our solution, and that engine fits back into portfolio, where we've done more than 1,000 studies with consistent 95% or above accuracy in estimating the actual study cost. But of course, what do you do when you are done sourcing, the contract is signed with strategic partner in a competitive manner? The journey only starts, because the trials are long, and there is the whole aspect of managing out of scope, of managing change orders, of reforecasting, supporting our colleagues in finance in their own invoice reconciliation, accrual management exercise. And there is nothing more important than being able to anticipate change. There was a discussion yesterday this track that I chaired, in which a colleague from the industry talked about the surprise change order. And change order should not be a surprise. If you track it consistently, if you manage actively your out of scope, if you do not allow invoicing on an out of scope, and if you make the change process fluid, it's a dialogue, it's collaboration, it's conversation, but it's also technology, because most of the CNFs or out of scope trackers that we've seen, unfortunately, are in PDF. So last year, we wanted to put the last piece of the puzzle together with our Vision product. Vision is really a labor of love. We know that a lot of the activities in outsourcing are centered at the study level. What's the outsourcing volume? Who do we send the RFP? What contracts do we manage at the study level? But of course, from an oversight perspective, you want to have that umbrella view at the vendor level. So yes, it is important that a CRO performs well on a study, and that's oversight at that study level. But what outsourcing managers need to know is how much business does the CRO have? And across which category, across which business line. And if you look at the recent mergers and acquisitions in the CRO space, it's not so easy to say how much business one has with ICON, for example, because they have central lab, phase one, technology, home nursing, they merge with PRA, and the story goes on and on. So being able to have that governance level visibility and metrics equally important. And as I'm dwelling a little bit too much on this slide, I also want to say that a successful business operation technology can only be successful if it includes the CROs and the sites. So we started the journey on building technology to improve the infrastructure for the CROs. We started with our core product in bidding, which we released in 2022. Core is the first to market SaaS technology for pricing. So think about it. If the CROs are pricing better, the quality of their proposal is going to be higher. Ultimately, with availability of benchmark data, the cost of outsourcing is going to be reduced. And there is really no reason why it should be a secret around how much a study costs. In fact, the way we envision the industry going forward, if all the cards are on the table, if you know your partner resourcing, if you know their rate cards, as a sponsor, you can drive the proposal from the very beginning. So you can eliminate so much fat that goes into due diligence, and I wouldn't call it fat, it's effort, it's sheer effort that goes in all the steps of the outsourcing process. So I'm going to go quicker over some of the highlights of our product. First module that I mentioned, Maestro, is about Clinical Master Portfolio. It's about clinical study planning and budgeting. And we saw many use cases for clinical study planning and budgeting, and surprisingly, very few sponsors and actually CROs that actually do consistent clinical study planning and budgeting, not to say at the study level, but further the program and portfolio level. There is a need to have visibility into your clinical development program and being able to run a ballpark very quickly, because maybe the study is starting in a couple of years, but maybe the study is starting tomorrow. So you need to have a very accurate model because you're going to initiate an outsourcing exercise, and you need to have good benchmark data. There is R&D partnership support. We work with a lot of biotechs that are negotiating with big pharma, who's paying a percentage of their clinical trial cost, and they tend to consistently underestimate. And we know that well, that's very hard to get more money after a deal is done. Further, there is an element of licensing. Licensing departments within pharma are constantly looking at new technologies, new molecules coming out of academia and other sources. Very important to be able to estimate the cost of bringing those assets to the market. And we are doing quite a bit of work with VCs, which are investing in biotechs, and they are looking at better ways to evaluate the investment that's required into taking a biotech to market, a product to market. So different elements that we do, of course, ballpark modeling, very important, takes minimum assumptions. Actually, with 7 assumptions, you can get to 75% accuracy. Detailed modeling, that's when you know every element of your protocol and you can spend hours in Clinical Maestro should you be inclined to. Configuration, very important. We want people to be empowered in setting up their study models. And at the end of the day, it's important to have analytics and sanity checks and make sure that when you are having a negotiation dialogue, you are having that dialogue based on data, not just based on your own history, which is what we've seen consistently looking at your own history rather than looking at industry data. So a little bit about our Source product. Source was built from ground up for R&D outsourcing with a deep focus on the clinical. So we all know why Source was born, and I said it before, generic solutions don't work. There is so much level of complexity at the study level that tools like GP or Ariba, they are just not meant for clinical outsourcing. And as a consequence, most companies have generic solutions, but they do outsourcing in Excel. So staggering number, 95% of the workbooks are in Excel. And what this means, especially for resource deprived outsourcing departments, is just more and more work that is coming either to the CRO, mapping and trying to execute on the sponsor needs, but of course also for the sponsor. So 4 main reasons why we focused on sourcing. One of it is having benchmark data when you source means that you are making informed decision making. You have the data that backs a negotiation. And you know, it's not only total cost, it's a number of hours. It's a resource allocation. We were talking before in the panel about the rates going up, and we updated the rates in Clinical Maestro on average 20% increase. But even if you can put it in the MSA to not go 20% higher, but you are hiring, let's say, more junior resources, you are going to have more hours at the resource level, and more hours is going to end up costing more and having, of course, other potential quality issues. We know strategic partnerships cannot be taken for granted. Actually, we are seeing right now across the board in pharma, massive renegotiations of their CRO partners. And I'm saying we cannot be taken for granted because there are hours and hours spent on negotiating rate cards, resource allocation, fixed cost templates, bid grid structure, you name it. And it's all beautifully mapped and hours of works and of effort spent on that. But can you manage this actively on a study level? Can you really go back to the MSA and say, indeed, we negotiated 210 for project manager, and that's exactly what has been used? Not very easy to do so. We know one of the main reasons why there are so many challenges in outsourcing and negotiation is the notorious bid grid mapping. And I highlighted in green because at the very end, I have 1 minute video on this, so stay with me. But really, bid grid mapping, it's something that the industry invented. We invented a way to complicate things even more. There is no standard, so every company has its own standard, and every CRO has its own native cost structure, which is natural. And what ends up happening, it's just a lot of Excel macros trying to match sometimes activities which are absolutely identical, but that may be a nomenclature issue. So we've seen the situation which a mapping was done for managed projects versus project management. So finally, when you source in Excel, this is how many analytics you're going to get out of it, because having a sourcing database contains so much information. That's the wealth of your company, because a bid contains regulatory data, enrollment data, location-specific data, contains rate cards, contains goals, contains timelines, contains study specifications, and all of these just get buried in Excel. And I remember very well when I was outsourcing, asking one of my team members to go back and say, just go back to the other study we just sourced 2 years ago to this same CRO. And they would just roll the eyes, like, really? You really want me to do that? Because it's just pulling an Excel spreadsheet and trying to do that manual comparison to get intelligence that you already have, but you cannot mine it easily. So source is about category sourcing. It's about making due diligence easier. It's about having that central intelligence, and it's about analytics. And I'm going to show you just some screenshots of source just to give you a sense of the level of sophistication of the tool. So the many ways in which you can bid, and you can, of course, use these modes in parallel. For example, bid to specification. It's when you lock the CRO from changing anything in your assumptions. So it's a price squeeze. Versus bid to expertise, when you want the CRO to suggest you a specific operational model, which you can use, of course, in parallel. Different ways in which you can get the bid back, which can be very detailed at the resource level, and we all know the CROs don't really like that part, or it can be a fixed cost template, a hybrid template. It can be single or competitive bidding. And all of these just gives options in terms of the deeper level of due diligence that the sponsor can do when receiving a CRO bid grid. And then, of course, it's nothing more beautiful than this for outsourcing geeks like me, I would say. Then seeing all the bids together, not on 10 different emails, but seeing them on a beautiful dashboard where you can easily grab, compare. We have a function which says compare to RFP, which is instantly brings in the benchmark. Very useful when you do non-competitive bidding. and being able to score and really very quickly assess where you are in your bidding journey, that makes the outsourcing manager's life significantly easier. And then keeping a track of your RACI. This is an example of a relatively simple RACI for lab outsourcing, for lab services outsourcing, but the RACI changes all the time. It actually changes during the bidding process. It almost always changes during a protocol amendment or a change order. And having that traceability of who is doing what and how that influences the cost of outsourcing, it's very important. And of course, you want to very quickly identify differences. So this is an example of 3 different bids, and the system is highlighting the highest cost. It's highlighting the variances, and I cannot show that dynamically, but you can go very deep. You can go into what's causing and driving a specific change, whether it's hours, resources, or rate cards. And then I spoke at the beginning, you are done sourcing. You log the contract, you feel good about it. But now, good luck managing it. And the management piece is, it's another labor of love. In our Clinical Maestro lead application, which is really geared towards contract management throughout the life cycle of a trial. So it's about activity reporting. It's about automating that PDF out-of-scope tracker, allowing the CROs to essentially maintain the same process that they have today, but instead of sending you a monthly activity report or save an out-of-scope tracker in the shared drive, they put the out-of-scope activities directly in Clinical Maestro with an approval workflow. You have full traceability, not only at the study level, but also at the portfolio level. And it does help with accrual management, invoice verifications, and the classic earned value analysis that can be done directly in the system. So this is a sample dashboard of what I always wanted to know when I was an outsourcing, the head of outsourcing, and I couldn't tell quickly where we are on that study. How much did we spend and on what, on which category? And where are we in terms of the forecast itself? So tracking the study progress in a simple manner with simple visualizations, it's critically important. Being able to drive a forecast, track spend and variance is very important, seeing that trend line and seeing on which areas you are under or overspending. And finally, vision. I spoke about vision at the beginning. A vision applies to both sponsors and CROs equally. Vision, it's about transparency. It's about creating tools for governance management. And it's about uniting disparate data sources. And we spend a ton of time talking to sourcing and alliance managers in the requirements phase to identify their pain points. And what we discovered is even simple things like contacts are being kept in personal Outlook mailboxes. You have to go into a system to get a contract in another system to see if the vendor is qualified, yet another system to see if there are issues, and yet a tracker to find out, on which RFPs, for example, are ongoing. So really the goal of Vision is to replace Excel trackers. It's meant as a high connectivity system. It's meant to sit in the middle to give the vendor portfolio view. So again, we're not talking about study view. We are not asking the question, who's working on study 1, 2, 3. We are asking the question, how much business do we have with CRO X and on which category? So a couple of visualization, category management, technology enabled is very powerful. And we focused a lot on building a central vendor database that feeds data from the vendor, from other sources, and being able to very quickly identify which vendors are on your portfolio, how much money you are spending with them, on which therapeutic area, on which category. And also identify what subcontractors you may have at the contract level. Very important, especially for small biotechs who may have one CRO and that CRO outsources to 6, 7 different vendors, and you find the names in the MSA. So very important to have that visibility. Governance made easy. So very important because the CROs are generally driving governance. They are the ones preparing the balanced scorecard. They are the ones doing the presentation for the QBRs. And all of this is more documents and more emails in SharePoint, Dropbox, wherever that information is being held. And we want the data to be in a system where it's easy to find and it's seen at the same time by all parties. Where we are going, we launched 2.0, Vision 2.0 last October. 3.0 is going to come towards the end of this year, and it's going to be all about performance management. And again, going against another classic Excel tracker, and I would say the Excel-based scorecard and being able to drive it out of the system. So our goal is to really automate, digitize, improve, and modernize all the major aspects and pain points of clinical business operations. And this means planning, it means bidding, it means managing, and vendor oversight. There's a lot of impact in what we do, and we measure it consistently. If you go to our website, you will see webinars with customers that are very vocal about their passion for Clinical Maestro, and we take their feedback most seriously. And we consistently ask about the impact of using technology in sourcing and in clinical business operations. And these are the three major impacts that we've consistently seen across the board. It's more visibility. It's bringing your partners closer. It's reducing manual effort. And I'm again going to go to the fact that the users in outsourcing and proposal managers are some of the most overworked, extremely well qualified individuals in our industry, very, very hard to recruit, very, very hard to retain, and their work is getting heavier. And we are looking at a very significant number, which is an average of 10% savings in the total study cost. And the study may be 1 million or maybe 100 million. And we are still seeing that consistent 10% number. And that 10% comes from better availability of benchmark data, for more transparency in negotiation, and for overall cutting the time to sourcing. I think one of the panelists, he left, he was here, came to a webinar with us talking about how the outsourcing timeline was reduced by 85% by using Clinical Maestro. So they say a picture says 1,000 words. So I'm going to play not a picture, a little video. We are candidates for Best in Show for our Clinical Maestro 4.0 application. So I won't say anything other than play this 1 minute video. And if you like it, hey, vote for us. So here you go. Let's hope it works. Okay. Okay, so this is our beautiful new mapping technology. The sponsors can create their own bid grid. They map into Clinical Maestro using dynamic mapping, so they can visualize and plan in their bid grid and still retain benchmark data. And this is an example in which they map to the CRO. A bit late. It was music. This is an example of a bid coming through in which you can see the tunnel view of the native structure of the sponsor, as well as all of the resources that the CRO allocates to the study. Okay, so this is my 1 minute video. Thank you so much. I'm open to questions. And if you like it, vote for us, please.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. Katrina Arcetta from Astellas. We are adopting Clinical Maestro and in pilot phase. I am curious though, because a lot of the tasks that we push through have different subtasks for the CROs. So what the CROs do is they publish their own budget grid, and it maps, it maps all of the subtasks. Is that how it I'm just curious.
Look,
If
we
is it
developed this
apples to
tool with
apples?
Astellas. So we spend many, many hours with your team, and we are going to do the first time CRO pilot right now. Yes, the idea is for the CROs to map once their native structure, and they will map one time to Clinical Maestro to develop a key. And then you have the Astellas or sponsor structure on the other side that's also mapped to Clinical Maestro. So you will always going to work in your native structure. The CRO doesn't have to map. They're going to work in their native structure. And then Clinical Maestro is going to put those beautiful dots that you see, or not the lines, to connect the two. So very familiar to Astellas project, and thank you, because this was a co-developed feature.
Thank you.
All right, great. Let's thank Anka.
Thank you.